Kim, I should start?
Yes, go ahead.
Good afternoon or morning, as the case may be. My name is Jeffrey Burke, and I am the Executive Director of the National Pollution Prevention Roundtable. On behalf of the Roundtable, I want to welcome all of you and thank you for joining this webinar as part of our Spring Safer Chemistry Challenge Program webinar series. Safer Chemistry Challenge Program, or SCCT, is designed to motivate, challenge, and reward facilities to reduce the use of chemicals, especially hazardous chemicals, through source reduction measures. Our webinar today is entitled DfE Safer Chemical Ingredients List. The Safer Chemical Ingredients List was created in September 2012 and now contains almost 650 safer chemicals and includes more than 150 fragrance chemicals. Safer Chemical Ingredients List serves as a resource for manufacturers interested in making safer products, health and environmental advocates seeking to encourage the use of safer chemicals, and consumers seeking information on the ingredients in safer chemical products. It serves as a guide for manufacturers of design for the environment labeled products, which must meet EPA's rigorous scientific standards for protecting human health and the environment. Our presenter today is Clive Davies with US and EPA. Clive is the Chief of the Design for the Environment Program in the Office of Pollution Prevention and Toxics. He has led the DfE program through development of methodologies to inform substitution to safer chemicals, including alternatives assessments for safer flame retardants in furniture and plastics, in BPA and thermal paper, and for phthalates in a range of applications. His group also conducts life cycle assessments to explore alternatives to lead solder in electronics and nanoscale innovation in batteries. DfE partners, including industry, states, and environmental groups, protect the environment and human health through actions that they take based on DfE partnerships. Clive has led the expansion of DfE Safer Product Labeling Program and the Safer Chemical Ingredients List. DfE SPLP allows product formulators who meet the program's rigorous criteria to use the DfE logo to distinguish the environmental leadership of their products. The Safer Chemical Ingredients List, recently published on the DfE website, lists hundreds of chemicals that meet DfE's rigorous criteria for use in DfE labeled products. Now, before I turn the program over to Clive, there are a few logistics to cover. During the webinar, all attendees will be on mute. If you have questions, please submit them through the Submit Question option in the chat window that GoToWebinar provides. Questions will be answered at the end of the webinar. We would very much like to hear from you about how this webinar helps meet your company's program needs to move towards safer chemistries. At the end of the webinar, you'll receive a survey, so please be sure to provide us with some feedback. And now I'll turn it over to Clive.
Thanks very much, Jeff, for that nice introduction. Looking forward to running through the program here for everybody and then taking some questions at the end. Let's go ahead to slide 2. Leslie, someone across the room here is forwarding the slides for us. So what I'd like to talk about here primarily is, like Jeff said, the safer chemical ingredient list that we've developed to help product formulators and chemical manufacturers showcase the safer chemicals that they've got, those that meet our criteria and can be used to make safer products. But to be able to get to that, I need to build to it a little bit to describe the background of what it's used for, why we created it in the first place, and the criteria that we use for listing of chemicals. So I'm going to introduce it that way. And then at the end of the presentation, I'm going to talk about redesign of the program logo for just a few minutes. That's something that's taken up a lot of our time and attention, and so I thought I would share with you what we're up to there. So what is DfE all about? Well, I think it's important for you to know where we are in the Environmental Protection Agency. We're part of the Office of Pollution Prevention and Toxics, where the agency implements the Toxic Substances Control Act, and where we make regulate, no regulate decisions on chemicals as they come into commerce. Through the last 30 years of doing this work, we've developed some expertise, some substantial expertise in evaluating chemicals, and evaluating chemicals generally associated with very little toxicological data. And so we've used structure-activity relationship in combination with the little data that exists for chemicals to be able to project their toxicity. And chemicals in commerce, existing chemicals, chemicals that were around before the Toxic Substances Control Act, are often also associated with very little data. So that the expertise that we've built up through the work of projecting toxicity of chemicals is very useful, actually, in differentiating the safest chemicals and being able to line those up for use in products, and to be able to compare chemicals across a functional class. So we look at safer chemicals. We think of ourselves as looking at the spectrum of chemicals, but we focus on the green end, and what our focus is to highlight those that meet our criteria, that are on the safer end, and to try to encourage their use, especially where they're highly functional. We also do work in alternatives assessment, which is not necessarily so much focused on strictly the greener end of the spectrum, but what it does do is it looks at chemicals that may pose a more substantial risk, chemicals that for example, are flame retardants used in plastics and furniture, and comparing those with other chemicals that might come into use for the same purpose, and helping industry, especially where there's a likelihood of changeover from a currently dominant chemical to another set of chemicals, helping industry choose from among the safest chemicals, so that they don't end up in a situation where they're moving from a chemical of concern, of known concern, to potentially another chemical that's not very well characterized and might pose concerns. And frankly, as industry thinks about moving, they're not going to want to jump 2 or 3 times from chemical to chemical. The costs associated with such a thing are something that you don't want to incur multiple times. And therefore, our information, I think, can be very valuable to folks who are looking into the future to decide which flame retardants, for example, to use. On the next slide, this shows our Safer Product Labeling Program, the status of that program. And this is a program that's been around since the late 90s in DfE, where we allow use of the DfE logo on products that are safer for people and the environment. There are about 2,500 products that meet our criteria right now, from about 500 partners, 500 companies who make those ingredients, or products rather. And the way that program works is we carry out an evaluation, a rigorous evaluation for every single ingredient in every single product, and those products aren't allowed to bear the logo until they meet our criteria. And those criteria are both for health, human health, and for the environment. And they're also complemented by a set of whole product criteria for things like pH and VOC. And you can see in the little text box here a whole list of product types where we label products. Now, if you take a look at this current screen, it shows that our criteria applies to at the chemical level we call it our ingredient criteria, so that every single ingredient type, every single functional use type has a criteria associated with it. So we have a criteria for surfactants, a criteria for solvents. And then there are the product level criteria that I talked about just a moment ago. And then there are company level criteria as well, where every company that has a product that is allowed to bear our logo has to sign a partnership agreement with us that lasts for 3 years. There are auditing requirements associated with having a partnership with our program. And I want to go to the next slide, which shows the health and environmental criteria. I want you to see that these criteria on the left for health and on the right for the environment have to be met by all of the chemicals in the products that bear the DfE logo. And I want you to see, I want to show you that these are, it's a broad range of criteria that every single chemical has to meet. And it's really the heart of our program. The most important thing for us is that the chemicals in the products meet these criteria, and that we encourage green chemistry by making sure that all of the chemicals meet these criteria, rather than allowing for a kind of an averaging across chemicals in a product. Let's go on to the next slide, Leslie. Thank you. So let me just for a second talk about this idea of functional use. So there's a reason that every chemical is in a product formulation. There are surfactants, wetting agents, there are solvents, there are fragrances and dyes, and they're all there to perform some kind of a function. And we find it very useful to distinguish chemicals by their functional use, so that we actually have criteria that apply by functional use. We have criteria for surfactants, like I was saying a second ago, that differ from our criteria for solvents, again, for chelants and for fragrances. And those criteria are all based on the types of characteristics that chemicals in those classes have. And a good example of why you need to do something like that is that surfactants, by their nature, are all aquatic toxins. What we're looking for, though, to distinguish a safer surfactant is that it biodegrades quickly when it gets into the waste stream, and before it can get out into the environment through a sewage treatment plant, for example. If you think about a solvent, it's got a different set of functionality, and it has a different set of toxicological characteristics. Tends to have more impacts that address the human health side of the equation from that previous slide. And so our criteria, as a result, focus on human health for solvents. Now, if you think about our criteria for safer chemical ingredients, it is broken down by functional class, so that we have a criteria for each of the functional classes that you can see here on the screen. And these functional classes are very important in terms of the way that we've set up our safer chemical ingredient list. You'll see when we get to the safer chemical ingredient list that there are functional class descriptions or functional class chemical listings for each of these areas. And actually, the safer chemical ingredient list is a kind of a neat way to see our criteria for each of these classes, because you can click through from that list back to the criteria and see what it looks like. The thing that I think is a very positive development from our safer chemical ingredient list and for developing these criteria in the first place is that chemical manufacturers are using our criteria, as call it design criteria, at least in part, for newer chemicals that they're developing, and are coming up with chemicals that meet that criteria, so that it's not just us encouraging folks to use the safest of the available chemicals, and it's not just us distinguishing among the chemicals that are available, but now we've got this development where folks are actually developing chemicals to meet our criteria, and highly functional, cost-effective chemicals that do that work. Another important part of our program, I just wanted to show you very briefly, is that there are listed chemicals that, of course, we don't allow in DfE products, and by list I mean, of course, lists of chemicals of concern that are issued by authoritative bodies. The EPA carcinogens list is an example of that, and there are many, many others. But 2-butoxyethanol is a chemical that, butyl-cellusolve is another name for it, that is pretty well known as a chemical that can cause health effects in people. It's included on a number of lists, and it's one that, of course, we don't allow in DfE products. But there's a similar chemical out there that's not on lists. It's used in consumer products, and it's one that we also don't allow. But the reason we don't allow it is not because it's on a list somewhere. It's because of its structural similarity and toxicological behavior. It's structural similarity to epoxyethanol, and you can see it just by looking at the chemical structure how similar that chemical is. So I would say that a very important part of our program is applying the toxicological expertise that we have developed as part of the new chemicals program, so that we don't allow chemicals, regardless of the amount of data that's allowed for them, where they're structurally similar to problematic chemicals. So we're moving now toward the safe chemical ingredient list. And this is a list. It's a list of chemicals that meet our safer chemical criteria. It's listed, as I was, I think, hinting earlier, by functional use class of surfactants, solvents, fragrances. It's got about 650 chemicals on it right now, 650 chemicals that meet our safer chemical criteria. Our intention is to update it on a frequent basis. We've been updating it probably more like every 4 months or 6 months recently, and we intend to keep that up. And I think for the federal government, that's pretty frequent. We listed these chemicals in part because of stakeholder requests for such a list, and you see here again there's a relationship between our Safer Product Labeling Program and the Safer Chemical Ingredient List, because the folks who made products to get the DfE logo were very interested. Can you go back, Leslie, please? We're very interested in being able to understand which chemicals they could use in products. And it was really, frankly, until recently, a little bit of a guessing game for them to know which chemicals they could use. And so, in part, because we wanted to be responsive to them, but also so that we could improve the transparency of the program, frankly, so that we weren't in a position where we were saying, well, we have criteria out there. Anyone who wants can go and evaluate chemicals against our criteria. Rather than a message like that, we say, okay, well, we've done the evaluation, and here are the chemicals. We frankly didn't do that historically because of concern over resources, but the agency just decided it was very important to invest in this way, and that the transparency was worth the investment. So it's the list is about 18 months old now, and the most recent update to the list was to add fragrance chemicals, and we're going to add further fragrance chemicals in the near future, so that we will hopefully be moving to a place where it's easier for folks who make products to also make fragrances for those products that are appealing for the general market. Right now, we've got just so that you know, since fragrances are up on the screen here so frequently, and the last 3 bullets there, that we're implementing a new fragrances criteria, and currently we just don't allow CMR or PBT chemicals, carcinogen, mutagen, reproductive toxin, or persistent bioaccumulative and toxic chemicals in our products, but we're increasing the scope of our fragrances criteria so that we also take into account, for example, sensitizers, and have that as part of our criteria. So this is a look at what our Safer Chemical Ingredient List landing page looks like. Just to give you a sense of what it is, the top part of the screen gives a very, very brief introduction into what the Safe Chemical Ingredient List is. It introduces the color-coded shapes, the green circle, green half circle, yellow triangle that are associated with all of the chemicals on the list. All of the chemicals have one of those color codes. And then the gray bands, for example, the one that says chelating agents. If you were on a live site, and we'll do that in just a moment, if you were on a live site, you could click on chelating agents, and you would have an expanding accordion that would show you the chelating agents that can be used in DfE products. A green circle, let me just tell you what these codes mean. A green circle is associated with any chemical that is characterized by what we consider to be a full data set per our criteria, where the chemical meets all of the thresholds, all of the toxicological thresholds in the criteria. A green half circle means that the chemical might be missing a little bit of data here or there for some of the endpoints where we think it should be associated with toxicological data. We've done modeling, and we believe that once testing is done, that chemical will meet our criteria and deserve a full green circle, but that testing hasn't been done, and we are listing the chemical there as a half green circle as a sign, a signal to manufacturers, hey, we really would like to see data developed for this chemical. And as a matter of fact, a number of manufacturers have seen these half green circles associated with their chemicals and have come to us asking us, well, what do I do to change the status of this chemical to a full green circle? And where we get that data, we actually have made and will soon make an additional at least one update to these geo color codes. We call them geometric color codes. A yellow triangle. Now, a yellow triangle means a yellow triangle might be assigned in a category where DfE allows chemicals in products that where we think that there is still room for green chemistry innovation. An example of this is preservatives, where obviously preservatives are designed to limit bacteriological growth, and you can imagine that they might be associated with some negative effects. And then another one is solvents. And solvents, for example, DfE criteria requires compliance with California Air Resource Board VOC limits, and that actually requires use of solvents that our criteria considers to be less favorable. And there are yellow triangles associated with those solvents that we allow for VOC compliance. So it's interesting to see the tensions involved in moving to safer chemistry. So what's this safer chemical ingredient list got to offer? Well, first of all, and I'll show you this in just a moment. We'll do a little demo of the site, but it's got the official chemical abstract number for the chemical. We lead with a common chemical name. We tried to find the name that's most used in the industry by folks who use those chemicals. But it's also associated with the EPA inventory name so that there's not confusion over what the chemical is. We list by the functional class of the chemical, and the color coding system that I've just described is included. What's not, what's not there is where a product manufacturer can go to buy the chemical. So who's the chemical manufacturer? That's not there. What the trade name for the chemical is not included. And also, for example, if it's a hydrogen peroxide that's up there, how that hydrogen peroxide is stabilized is also not included. So as folks make products and as folks use the safer chemical ingredient list, they have to get additional information. One source of that information, one source that we'd actually frankly like to build out even further is Clean Ingredients. Clean Ingredients is a site. It's unfortunately a pay-for-service site, but it's operated by a Green-Blue, the NGO Green-Blue. And what someone who uses that site can get from the site is where do I buy this surfactant that is preserved in a way that is acceptable to DfE? Who do I call? What's the name of the formulation? The other neat thing is that the DfE list, the safer chemical ingredient list, does not include trade secret chemicals, chemicals that, for example, dyes are often protected as trade secret, and therefore their chemical identity is not given on the safer chemical ingredient list. But those chemicals could be listed on the safer chemical ingredient list, and their identity could be protected. So I think that that's a neat benefit that you can get from Clean Ingredients. Clean Ingredients could be an even more robust listing with more chemicals than the safer chemical ingredient list, eventually, if it's built out to its capacity. So what can folks do with the safer chemical ingredient list? I mean, it's not just for product formulators. A chemical manufacturer can use the list. And as a matter of fact, chemical manufacturers have used our criteria before we had the list, and now the list as a target in developing safer chemistries. We've had hundreds of chemistries, hundreds of surfactants actually have been either identified as meeting our criteria through testing, or have been developed specifically to meet our criteria. So surfactants, which are a relatively easy bar to meet. I don't mean to trivialize how hard it is to synthesize those chemicals, but what we're seeing now is that solvents are being designed specifically to meet our solvents criteria and to be high-performing in the types of products that DfE labels. So I think that's a pretty fantastic thing that we've seen, and these companies, I'm talking about Eastman actually right now, have made sure that as they develop these chemicals, they also did the testing that would be required for us to be able to make an affirmative statement and give a full green circle for these chemicals. So I see that as a very, very positive development, and that's in addition to the fact that folks are developing data to show that their chemicals meet our criteria. Product formulators, obviously product formulators can go to the Safer Chemical Ingredient List and get a good sense of the types of chemicals that they can use in DfE products. Obviously for clean ingredients, the Safer Chemical Ingredient List is a good base for building their stable of chemicals that of chemical products really that they can offer to the industry. Also, the Safer Chemical Ingredient List is a basis for EPA's new data system, ChemView, to get chemicals and to broaden the listing that they offer. ChemView is largely contains information on chemicals for which hazard assessments have been done under things like the High Production Volume Challenge for chemicals. But now we can supplement that with information on really the greener end of the spectrum, and folks can actually look at ChemView. We're going to see ChemView in just a second. See a screenshot of ChemView, and can actually pick a chemical CAS number and then choose the data sources for which you can get information on that chemical, and that's something that folks have found to be very, very useful. And it's great to be able to use the DfE data and have the high production volume data, for example, or other data like CDR, the chemical data reporting system data, all in one place. And then I just talked about this just a second ago. Go ahead, Leslie. So we see chemical manufacturers right now working with DfE to put up safer chemicals as through the TSCA PMN process. As chemicals come into the agency can mark the chemicals, I guess flag the chemicals that have potential to be listed on the Safer Chemical Ingredient List. It's a nice synergy with the program under TSCA. Also, there are these additional program classes that we are considering as entry points where we could broaden, with or without labeling, frankly, broaden the listing of safer chemicals. And we're interested in hearing what you think about this listing of safer chemicals and what we could do to improve it. Okay, Leslie. Before we do ChemView, let's do a little live tour, Leslie, of the Safer Chemical Ingredient List. Leslie is going to the internet. Oh, there we are. And she's going to go to our Safer Chemical Ingredient List from the DfE home site, if she can find it. We're wondering just how easy to navigate this is. Maybe that's one area for improvement. I always go to Google and type in DfE SCIL, and it comes right up. So you can see here that there's a brief introduction to the website up top here. There's a brief explanation of our geometric color codes right here, or the fact that those are available. And then you can see Leslie is scrolling down through this accordion that will open up and show you the chemicals in each class. Keep going down. I just want to show folks here, Leslie, that there is additional information about the list. There's an explanation of what it contains, what it doesn't contain, what the criteria are to get on the list. So I think folks get the idea. So you go ahead up, Leslie, to the accordion. Fantastic. And just under the accordion, you see a link, a downloadable Excel spreadsheet. Just want folks to know that there is more than one way to get the data here for the safer chemical ingredient list. One way is to directly on the internet by ingredient class look at the chemicals themselves. But another way to do that is to download this Excel file that will allow you to put the safer chemical ingredients into a data system that you have by CAS number, or simply to have it available to browse. And you can see the tabs along the bottom are the fragrance classes, or the ingredient classes. And going from left to right on each of these lists is, or well, we've got our color codes here explained, but also, or expanded, but also the CAS number, the name of the chemical, the common name of the chemical, and then the TSCA name. So go ahead back, Leslie. Let's go to the site, if we can get our computer to cooperate. Here we are. And what I'd like to do now is I'd like to expand a couple of these classes just to show you what's inside of them. Let's see, which one do we want to do first? Let's go to surfactants. And you can see here, and just scroll down the list. Surfactants is the most is a very highly populated class of chemicals. We have a number of don't click on that, Leslie. We'll click on a different one. Just show them the chemicals. These surfactants span a broad range of functional needs, and we hear from our formulating partners that they do a pretty good job of meeting the needs for surfactancy in products that they make to bear the DfE logo. Now go ahead and collapse that class, please. And what we'd like to look at next is solvents. I'd like to expand the solvents class. Great. Now, if you take a look just under the solvents label, you see evaluated chemicals that meet DfE's criteria for solvents. Yeah, click on that, please. And what this will do is take you to our criteria. There are actually two links you have to make here. Our criteria for solvents. And up at the top of the page, right under the title, there's a PDF that is our criteria for solvents. If anybody wants to take a look, this is our toxicologically based criteria for solvents, and it shows what the thresholds that have to be met for every toxicological endpoint, and also the definitions and a range of other things and explanations of how the work is done. Go ahead and shut that. Leslie, and so you can see here in this class that the chemicals are, oops, oh, can you open it again, please? Thanks. You can see that the chemicals in this class are marked with the geo color codes, and you can see that a number of the solvents here have full green circles, but there are also solvents that have these yellow triangles, and largely in the solvents class, just to give you an example, the yellow triangle solvents are needed to meet functional needs, and generally in this class, they're meeting those functional needs at a low VOC level, and unfortunately, that requires some trade-offs to be made and use of chemicals that we don't believe are toxicologically ideal. They are the safest of the group that's available, though. All right. So let's go back to our slide presentation and just very quickly give people a picture of the ChemView site. Slideshow. And so it's a relatively new, a number of months old site that's available. It's a site that's a subject of quite a bit of investment by the agency right now. We view ChemView as an important way to improve transparency, to make access to information on chemicals easier for folks. And you can see here the second major bullet shows some of the sources of the data that are available up there. And the neat thing, if you go to the next slide, please, the neat thing here is that this slide actually, unfortunately, doesn't show it very well, but there's a function in ChemView that allows selection of the lists, or rather the sources from which you can find information on chemicals. And you can, just by clicking a button, you can get a presentation of data from all of those sources for a given chemical, and get it to pop right up so that you can see what the information is that the agency has on that chemical. And I think it's a real leap forward for the agency, and it's a great way for folks to be able to understand what we know about chemicals. Let's just spend maybe a minute on logo redesign. So what I would like to tell you is that we're redesigning the DfE logo. You can see there the beautiful Energy Star and WaterSense logos, and then the Design for the Environment, slightly less attractive logo. Clip art from 1972. That's an exaggeration, actually, but you can see the difference between the sets of logos there. But the thing that we want to improve on from this logo is we want to be able to communicate that our logo distinguishes safer chemical-based products. It's about protecting human health as well as the environment, and we want it to be something that folks can see and quickly recognize and get the benefit from. Leslie, could you please? And so we did a little bit of consumer work, a lot of stakeholder work on what folks think about the current label. And this is what we heard from folks, that the science-based standards are strong from our partners and NGOs, that the scientific expertise of the agency is respected, that the evaluation process for DfE products is as cost-effective as we can make it, and people judge it to be cost-effective, and that there's an issue with consumer recognition of the current logo, and that actually is something we'd like to fix. We want to preserve what we've got in the I&I area, or improve it, but also we would like consumers to be able to get the benefit of choosing safer products. And the things that we hear from consumers, it's kind of interesting that they don't recognize very well at all, that not many people do, if any, recognize the DfE logo as differentiating safer products. But once it's explained to them, they find the benefits appealing. They certainly value health, human health, and health of children, family, and pets more than they do environmental benefits. The current name doesn't mean anything to anyone, and the chemistry and chemicals to folks out there who buy products has negative connotations and isn't really associated with the chemicals that are in the products, and that's not a good name to use. So Safer Chem is not a good new name. So the next slide, I think, is, it's a set of websites where you can get more information. And with that, I'll take any questions and handle that however you guys want to. Kim, are you going to take over, and how should we handle the questions?
Yeah, I've got a few questions. So, hi everyone, this is Richards with the National Pollution Prevention Roundtable, and I do want to thank everyone for joining us today for today's Safer Chemistry Challenge Program webinar. Also, thanks to Clive Davies for a fantastic presentation. Just an FYI, the presentation and recording will be available on our website, p2.org, in the next week or so. And we do have time for some questions, so please continue submitting any questions on your webinar control panel. We do have a few questions to go ahead and get started. Clive, can you please describe a little bit more about how the list is responsive to stakeholders? What is this process?
Sure, absolutely. So reason that we put the list up in the first place is that the folks who make cleaning products have asked for a number of years. Their biggest request to us and to me has been, okay, so what if I want to make a DfE product? Where do I find the chemicals to use in that product? It's a guessing game. And in part, to respond to that request, we have listed these chemicals up on our website. Also, I would say it's responsive to a general need to improve the agency's transparency and to make this kind of information available to the kinds of folks who can use it, which may run from a range of very sophisticated consumers to product manufacturers and then chemical manufacturers, but also advocates for health and the environment. I hope that's the answer that that you were looking for.
Great, thank you. Next question: what is the relationship between the Safer Chemical Ingredients List, Safer Products Labeling, and DfE Alternatives Assessment process?
Ah, that's a great question. So there's a strong relationship between the Safer Chemical Ingredient List and the Safer Product Labeling program. The Safer Chemical Ingredient List is designed to be a list of chemicals that can be used by product manufacturers to develop products that can bear the logo. It's not as simple and direct as that because, say, for example, I was talking earlier about hydrogen peroxide has to be preserved to be used in products or stabilized, and surfactants have to be preserved, and other chemicals have similar needs. And we don't include information that allows people to understand which peroxide is stabilized in a way that I can use in a product. There's another level that's required there. We do include the stabilizers in our list of oxidants that are allowed, but the two things aren't put together. So that makes it a kind of a more difficult link. But there is intended to be a direct relationship there. Now, our alternatives assessment program is a little bit different. Our alternatives assessment program looks at chemicals that the agency has decided to do further work on, evaluation in some cases. For example, decabromide phenyl ether, a flame retardant that's broadly used in plastics. We did an alternatives assessment there that was designed to help product manufacturers find safer alternatives to flame retard the plastics that they were going to have to flame retard because the industry was taking action to phase out of that flame retardant, and we felt that it was worth the agency's investment to help folks move to the safest possible alternatives rather than simply the highest functioning and most cost-effective alternatives necessarily. And that way everybody benefits because the manufacturers get what probably is a longer-term benefit by going to a lasting alternative, and the public gets the health benefit from the safer chemical. But those alternatives aren't necessarily the sort of thing that we would want on our safer chemical ingredient list. They still may be associated with some level of health concerns. So we haven't tried to join the alternatives assessment and the safer chemical ingredient list, but it is a possibility for the future, especially if we look at conducting alternatives assessments in areas that would make sense for safer chemical listing. So there's a possibility of a synergy there, but that synergy is not direct right now.
Great, thank you. That was a good explanation for that. Next question: what is the EO calculator for the Safer Chemicals Ingredient List?
Okay. So EO for essential oil. So it would be very simple, I think. Well, simple. So fragrances are very complex mixtures of chemicals. And it's quite a challenge, actually, to make a surfactant, a fragrance, especially a consumer-facing fragrance, from a discrete list of chemicals, and chemical manufacturers often use essential oils in that process. And you can be in a place where you've got really literally scores of chemicals that are used in fragrance formulations. And finding those scores that meet the DfE fragrance criteria can be difficult. And we have put together, because of that, we have put together a what we call our fragrances calculator. Actually, we've renamed it from being our essential oil calculator to our fragrances calculator, that will allow a fragrance house, a fragrance manufacturer, to formulate a fragrance, enter the CAS numbers for the discrete chemicals and the essential oils that they used in that fragrance, and to have the output, the result, be a summary of how close that formulation comes to meeting our criteria. And it will give them hints of, well, you cannot use this oil, or you have to take this chemical out, or you can only use this chemical up to this level. So it's hopefully going to be a very useful tool to the folks making fragrances as they try to comply with our criteria.
Okay, great. This question kind of expands upon that. Is there a concern that essential oils are harming human health and or the environment?
Well, we make our conclusions about the green end of the spectrum, and we decide if a chemical meets the safer chemical criteria for fragrances, for example. And we don't make really judgments about the harm that the chemical might do. But as we evaluate chemicals, we've evaluated about 300 fragrance chemicals, and we have managed to put about 150 of those on our safer chemical ingredient list, those that meet our criteria. And some of them have limitations, but we have found a number of chemicals that can meet our criteria, and so I think that says something. I would say, though, on the other hand, if I'm just going to talk about fragrances for a second, that each fragrance house, the perfumer from each fragrance house who works on DfE type products, or perfumers, might have a sort of a personal, call it a personal palette of fragrance ingredients that includes discrete chemicals, but also essential oils, of maybe 500 chemicals, and that differs from perfumer to perfumer, kind of their go-to list. When DfE has been through the process to evaluate 300 chemicals in total so far, and only has about 150 on our list, I mean, you can see how that would be a bit of a barrier to coming up with consumer-facing, sophisticated fragrance formulations. And so we see this as an area where we've still got more work to do, and we've been talking with and working with the fragrance industry as we go through this process. We're going up to talk with them at the beginning of April, having a visit to talk about data needs and chemical evaluation, and how we can best talk to each other to evaluate chemicals to meet our criteria. And we're also having conversations with the NGO community at the same time. So it's an important area of investment for us, and one where we're focused on getting to a place where folks will be able to formulate attractive consumer-facing fragrances that won't pose concerns for consumers. And I should have done a webinar just on our fragrances criteria.
Great, thank you. On to the next question. Do you know the timeline for the new logo and/or name?
So we're working through some internal issues right now. Once we get those completed, we're going to go into a phase where we start getting stakeholder feedback on our design concepts. That could start anytime in the next month or so, or it could be announced in the next month or so, because we have to allow some notice so folks can get on webinars. So what we could have, if we can move forward very quickly, and it's all based on internal constraints right now, would be a fall announcement of a new name, and we would call that a soft launch, where folks who make products could start using the new logo, and that a new logo, new name, and then probably the following spring or sometime after that, we would have what we call a hard launch, where we are going to ask our product manufacturers, to the degree that it's possible, to have consumer-facing products on the market and we could do outreach as well as our partners. And I do want to say that this logo redesign is aimed primarily at the consumer market. We are very, though, conscious of the fact that we've got Jansan products out there, and that we don't want to damage those folks in any way. So that is a consideration that's very, very important to us.
Okay, and again, moving on from that question, will there be other enhancements to the DfE program once the new logo is launched?
The DfE program, in our view, is something that is always undergoing continuous improvement. For example, all the chemicals on the safer chemical ingredient list, we are going to evaluate those once every 3 years, re-evaluate all of those. I didn't talk about it, but there's a gray square associated with the geo color codes, the other ones, the green circle, and so forth. And that, you may notice if you open some of the categories on the internet, is a mark that says that, okay, we've reevaluated this chemical, and we're giving our product formulators a period of time to get out of that chemical and find an alternative, because we have found new data saying that it doesn't meet our criteria. Just as an example, but there are other areas for improvement as well. And those include transparency for better documentation of ingredient classes, and as safer chemistry becomes available, we're going to change our criteria so that only the safest chemicals that are available can be used in DfE products. So we see it as a constant move toward green chemistry.
Great, thank you. Next question, how does DfE compare to Green Seal?
I think DfE and Green Seal are they're two obviously different programs. I think that they are mutually reinforcing, and we learn things from each other, I think, all the time. And I would say also that the Safer Chemical Ingredient List is an important resource for both programs. You can use the Safer Chemical Ingredient List directly to list, to have DfE recognized products, but it can also be very helpful for folks trying to formulate Green Seal type products as well.
Thank you. And can you talk more about the product qualification process for the DfE logo?
Absolutely. If you look on our website under How to Partner, there are enumerated steps on the things that you need to do to be able to get the DfE logo. There's actually a flow chart at the top of that page. I think Leslie's trying to find it now as I'm talking. I don't know if everybody can see our page. But the process is that if I assume you're a product formulator, you can come and talk to us anytime. You can send us an email. You can call one of us on the telephone, and we will talk to you about this. But the first step is to submit your application to one of the DfE third parties. There are 2 qualified third parties that are listed on our website, so that they can prepare a dossier on your products that is submitted to DfE, and they'll do the preparatory work of the reviews of any chemicals that are not on the Safer Chemical Ingredient List. any synergistic effects from the way that the ingredients are put together, and they will then talk to you and make a decision about, together you guys can make a decision about whether you submit that, that application to us, and then there would be a DfE review and approval process so that you could have products that bear the logo. And what we are saying in terms of timeframes right now, and I believe that we're meeting these as long as there aren't issues with chemicals that need work to be done on them, such as data developed. 8 weeks. 8 weeks at the third party, at the qualified third party, and then 8 weeks at DfE. So that's a 16-week, 4-month period to get the logo. And I think that folks are finding that right now that we're meeting those timeframes. We had a backlog actually until recently of applications that we have managed to get through.
Great, thank you. And unfortunately, we're running out of time, so I think we have time for one last question. Could EPA launch a promotion with big box stores to make DfE more well known?
So that's a really interesting idea, and it's interesting that that Walmart's sustainability work, their chemical sustainability work, as one of its pillars, that their store brand products are going to become, to the extent that it's possible for the folks making those products, DfE labeled. So I think that that's a very positive development. Wegmans is moving to do the same kind of thing, and the Safeway stores have their bright green products that are DfE labeled, and I think that all those folks working together, and especially if we can do some work when we redesign our logo, can hopefully make the DfE logo better known, and hopefully then get to a place where we have, you know, what we see as a desirable goal is that the consumer pull will speak more and more loudly to the folks who make products, and that there will be benefit for the folks who make products to work with us. And that noise will then go to the chemical manufacturers, who will increasingly be motivated to design and synthesize safer chemicals. And so to get that process working more and more, especially in the space where DfE is operating, you know, that's why we are redesigning our logo, and that's our goal. I think that's a wonderful question. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Clive, and I'm going to pass it over to Jeff again to close out our webinar for today.
Okay. Again, thanks to our excellent speaker, Clive Davies from EPA, and to all the attendees. We had over 85 attendees on this webinar, and we hope that you will check out the NPPR website at p2.org/challenge and become a member of the Safer Chemistry Challenge program so that we can continue to provide these types of services in the future. Upcoming events that NPPR will be involved with is the 2014 Great Lakes Green Chemistry Conference in Cleveland, Ohio, April 1st and 2nd. And also June 4th, the green screen training will be held in Buffalo, New York. And again, that information about both of those events can be found at the NPPR website. Also, remember to complete the survey following the webinar. And again, thanks everybody.